Okay, good morning, dear colleagues, and it's a great pleasure for me to open up this launch event we have here at the European Medicines Agency on the topic of our regulatory science research needs, which we published just before Christmas. My name is Tony Humphreys, and I'm heading up a task force on regulatory science and innovation, and I'm looking forward to what I hope will be a very informative and sort of a fruitful exchange between many participants that have already registered for this event, many hundreds of participants registering for this event. I just want to draw your attention to some housekeeping notes with regards to privacy statements about the fact that we are actually, this is an online live broadcast, so the various interventions and exchanges will be there for everybody to see. And of course, we hope to leave a recording of this event also on our website for those that may wish to review it later or who are unable to join us live today. With that being said, then, I'd like to, before I go through describing the rest of the agenda, I would like to pass the floor to my Executive Director, Emer Cook, who will give a formal opening of this launch event and maybe explain a little bit of the background and the primary motivation why we as an agency have invested in it to get it to this stage. And hopefully that then will aid your understanding of what we're about today. So please, Emer.
Thank you very much, Tony. As Tony said, I'm Emer Cook. I'm the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency. And I have to say, I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's launch event of EMA's Regulatory Science Research Needs Initiative. So those of you who are online now know that we published these research needs just before the end of last year. And today we want to present this initiative to you. And I have to also say that I'm delighted to see that we have more than 400 people registered to join us this morning. And we see this as a very positive support and interest in the regulatory science agenda, in particular, the regulatory science needs that we flagged. I think it's extremely important that we have the representation from patient organizations and patients themselves, because the ultimate recipient of these, the outcome of the researches will be the patient. And we want to thank you for your ever increasing involvement and engagement in medicines regulation and regulatory science. There's also a very strong representation from life sciences academia. And again, this is a source of innovation in translation research. So we cannot do without the involvement of academia in this work. A special welcome also to the funding organizations who are attending today, because none of the needs we have identified can be addressed without the support of vital funding. We have medicines developers, trade associations, all of whom have worked and collaborated extensively with academia organizations, in particular in the many public-private projects of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI, which has helped to progress regulatory science. And in addition, we see that there is an immediate perspective for these collaborations to continue in an even wider context, embracing feedback within the Innovative Health Initiative, or IHI. So as we highlighted in our regulatory science strategy to 2025, excellence in regulatory science is fundamental to everything we do at the agency and across the European network of regulators. We are tasked with the evaluation and supervision of innovative medicines all along their life cycle, from their initial development to clinical testing to marketing authorization, and then long-term use in healthcare settings, which includes following up how these medicines are used optimally, avoiding side effects and better treating patients. The speed of evolution in this development, testing and approval paradigm, and the needs of this to be underpinned by regulatory science have never been higher than with the ongoing pandemic response. We expect this evolution to continue at pace in the face of major public health challenges, Ones we know, such as antimicrobial resistance, beating cancer, healthy aging, but also in the context of unknown threats such as disease X and novel pathogens. It's really critical that our collective investment in global regulatory science addresses the most important areas that will enable this evolution so as to deliver both maximum public health impact and return on that collective investment. And indeed, this was the motivation behind this initiative, which was born from the combined reflection of leadership figures from EMA's many scientific committees and working parties on what would be the future regulatory science needs based on the advice that they're giving and the assessment experience. Now, by publishing the regulatory science research needs, we hope to influence the various research funding bodies to consider taking up at least some of these topics in the research agendas. And this will facilitate the evolution of the regulatory science knowledge base with benefit not just for Europe, but globally. Addressing these needs effectively requires support from researchers and funders, as well as multi-state collaboration to generate high-quality proposals that will rigorously fill any research gaps. But ultimately, let's not forget that the goal is improved access and solution for patients. The webinar today marks part of our commitment to stimulate progress in regulatory science in the service of patients' access to innovative medicines. We're expecting to maintain this initiative over the years to come, flagging additional regulatory science issues, and these will contribute to the revision of our guidelines and help to inform our scientific assessment of future medicines. So let me wish you a fruitful webinar, and I'm really looking forward to the long-term investment in research into regulatory science. Thank you to all of you for joining, and I'm looking forward to also hearing about the progress of this research in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Emer. That's been a great opening to this launch event, and let's hope then it helps contextualize what we have been trying to put together with defining these needs, which, as I said, we published before Christmas, and we'll hear a little bit more about as we proceed through the event today. If I can just draw your attention now to the agenda and just walk you through. First of all, in the right-hand side, guys, it wouldn't be a virtual online conference these days if we didn't have a slido.com. No commercial interest in that, I have to declare you right now, but we are on the hashtag Rsrn, and you're very free then to throw questions into that function, and we will do our best in the various Q&A sessions to answer those. And we're sort of hoping we'll be overwhelmed with questions, and if we don't get to your particular question today, just simply due to time limitations, we will endeavour as a function to get back to you very shortly after this event finishes. So that's my promise or commitment to you, but please do use the Slido to participate. What I have now, it's just to walk you through the programme for the rest of the morning. We have a kick-off introduction then to how the needs list was established, and that's very much presented by my colleagues in the academic liaison function that we've been trying to set up now for the last couple of years in the agency. So you'll hear from Dr. Philip Hines and Dr. Li Fang Liu. Thereafter, we'll open up that sort of, to a Q&A session, which we hope to be relatively short because it's more of understanding or clarification on how the needs were established, and that will be moderated by Dr. Ralph Herald, who's also involved with the academic liaison function and is coordinating it on our behalf. Thereafter, we're going to have a couple of perspectives with regards to the regulatory science needs. Not just from a European perspective, but also perhaps a global one, looking across to our cousins in the States. And we'll hear first from Professor Richard Guy, University of Bath, who has got quite an extensive experience in the regulatory scientific research. And I'll introduce a little bit more about Richard when we get to his presentation. We would be nowhere without the funders, and one of the key, we're very greatly pleased to have Carmen Laplaza Santos from the European Commission, who's going to highlight us the opportunities presented under the Horizon Europe framework, and in particular the Innovative Health Initiative, which is the successor, a more ambitious structure beyond even the Innovative Medicines Initiative that Ema referred to in her opening remarks. And we will then bookend Carmen's presentation with another academic view, a very active academic researcher, Franz Kunig from the Medical University of Vienna. Thereafter, we will throw it open to a more general Q&A session. So if you don't manage to get it in the first, more focused on the needs themselves, we can have a more free-ranging Q&A thereafter. And we hope to wrap up by midday. So that's pretty much the running order of the event. And as I say, please do use that slido.com facility to engage with us actively during the course of this morning. So that's probably more than enough from me at this stage. And if I can then hand over the mic to Philip and Li Fang, and they will walk you through the background to the establishment of the needs itself. So Li Fang, I think you're kicking off first, please.
Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you. Good morning, dear colleagues. Welcome again to our launch event of the Regulatory Science Research Needs Initiative. Together with my colleague Philip Hyens, we will first go through the background and why we developed this initiative. And then after my presentation, Philip will talk about operational aspect, how you would engage on this initiative. So without more further ado, I would like to kick into the context. Next slide, please. So first of all, what is regulatory science? We define regulatory science as a range of scientific disciplines that are applied to the quality, safety, and efficacy assessment of medicinal products, and that inform regulatory decision-making through the life cycle of a medicine. Next slide, please. And the European Medicines Agency put human and animal health at the heart of our work. To reach this goal, we facilitate the development and access to medicines. We evaluate applications for marketing authorization for medicines to make sure that the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicines are of a high standard. We also monitor the safety of medicine before and after marketing authorization. And finally, we also try to provide high-quality information on medicines to support healthcare professionals and patients for the best use of the medicine. All in all, science is at the foundation of everything that we do. Thank you. And acceleration of innovation in medicines development requires a parallel advancement in regulatory science, and new technologies and evolving science throw new questions to us on our day-to-day work as regulators. And it's so important that those questions are addressed so the innovation can be translated safely and swiftly into effective high-quality therapies. We ask ourselves every day in our daily work, how ready are we to engage with emerging science and technology innovations such as real-world data, big data, precision medicine, novel manufacturing, and novel clinical trial designs, and so forth. And do we have the necessary skills and competencies or access to specific expertise required? Are we generating new guidance or providing sufficient level of advice to facilitate the utilization and translation of this innovation? Next slide, please. Those questions stem from our daily work and strongly underpin the development of the Regulatory Science Strategy 2025. To advance regulatory science to keep pace with the acceleration of innovation, the agency committed to convey the regulatory research needs, which will be launched officially today in this Regulatory Science Strategy 2025. You can see the goal number 5 in front of you, focus on enabling and leveraging research and innovation in regulatory science. Specifically, it committed to develop network-led partnerships with academia, research centers to undertake research in strategic areas of regulatory science and to leverage collaborations between academia and network scientists to address rapidly emerging regulatory science research questions. Therefore, we embrace today as the opportunity to engage with all of you as our key stakeholders to get together to address those unmet needs in regulatory science. Next slide, please. The development of the regulatory science research needs started from interviews of our key stakeholders, namely the agency's scientific committees, working parties, together with external experts and key opinions leaders of the principal stakeholder groups. In total, we have conducted 70 interviews to collect their respective research needs. And then the list of the needs has gone through a review process of EMA topic experts and then sent back to the scientific committee's chairs for their approval. Afterwards, we also consult healthcare professional working parties and patient consumers working parties because they are ultimate end user of these research needs for further consultation. To this end, we have collected around 120 questions in this list, where 80 of them were related to human medicines and 40 are to veterinary medicines, while 20 of them hold valid and relevant for both veterinary and human medicines. Next slide, please. Herewith, I would like to present you the first version, the version number 1 of the regulatory science research needs, which was published just before Christmas last year. And the document starts with an executive summary where highlights the rationale and the ways to engage with us on this initiative. And the main body of this document is the 120 research needs, which are classified according to the core recommendations and the goals of the Regulatory Science Strategy 2025, according to in the human and veterinary medicine. The document also explained the methodology of developing these research needs and with a couple of options for research funding and support. Next slide, please. Now I wish to walk you through some vivid example of these research needs published in this document. First of all, each of the research needs has been given a number to relate to the Regulatory Science Strategy 2025, the 5 goals and its core recommendations. It can be seen in the first column on this table. H means that these questions related to human medicine, and the 2 means this research needs is under the RSS goal number 2, and 5 means this is under the 5th core recommendation, and the 4 means this is the 4th question under the same core recommendation. So when you would like to reach us related to this question, please just click on the link and it will generate an automatic email which will be sent to us and we will reply to you on these specific needs. After the number, we describe the research needs under the column of the research topic. And each topic is exemplified by further defining the objectives to give clearer scope of the needs. And most importantly, the expected impact of delivering such research needs has been highlighted to support the funders and researchers in drafting research programs for the benefit of patient and public health. Looking at the content of these research needs, it's focused on identifying areas of highest unmet needs where real-world evidence can supplement clinical trial data in regulatory decision-making, also to investigate the corresponding methodology approaches. As you all know, clinical research on special populations, for example, elderly, pregnant women, children, patients with rare conditions often suffered from small sample size and ethical constraints. Real-world evidence provides an excellent source of information evidence to support regulatory decision-making. The forthcoming Darwin EU is one major real-world evidence platform to support such research. It is a federated network of data, expertise, and service in total. And this important element has already been taken into the work program of Horizon Europe, work program 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. And the second example is focusing on the understanding and providing solutions on the methodological, organizational, and regulatory challenges for complex clinical trials that involve multiple companies and products. The recently launched Accelerating Clinical Trials in the EU, so-called ACT-EU, precisely aim to further develop the EU as the focal point for clinical research, further promote the development of high quality, safe, and effective medicine, and to better integrate clinical research into the European health system. And finally, last slide, please. I wish to present you a question that has been identified in the veterinary medicine domain. This focused on novel manufacturing methodology and approaches. This research needs highlighted the importance of conducting horizon scanning into medicines composed of novel nanomaterials, which may not be amenable to the conventional chemistry manufacturing controls characterization, pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamics conventions. And research to these needs will prepare the EU regulators to advise and regulate nanomaterials and medicine and medicinal products in combination with medical devices. Herewith, I would like to end this part of my presentation, and for you to know, these three examples is just a tiny fraction of all the needs that we collected and those that will come. So I'm now very happy to hand it over to Philip to continue the discussion on how you can engage with us on these research needs. Hand it over to you, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Li Fang, for introducing this initiative. So I'm going to be talking through the operation of the Rsrn. And firstly, I want to highlight EMA's activities. The primary activity will be to continue to identify new regulatory science research needs. And we're envisaging a periodic update of this needs list document. And we want to work with you all as well to identify these research needs, and I'll touch on that a bit more later. Secondly, we want to work with, or we are working with, research funders who are interested in conducting and funding regulatory science research to elaborate these research needs and flesh out research calls as appropriate. We will continue our regulatory input into ongoing regulatory science research through, for example, informal regulatory advice, or through hosting researchers at the EMA to make the most of EMA's data and EMA's expertise. And we'll also continue to be directly involved in externally funded regulatory science research, either as advisory board members, as project partners, or even project leaders. And the process of how EMA can get involved is on our website, and there's a link within this PowerPoint that we'll share to you. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we want to ensure the translation of this regulatory science research into regulatory practice, and therefore into medicines development, and therefore into improved public health. And it's this chain of translation where we see the real added value in this initiative. Next slide, please. And so I just want to take you through a sort of schematic of the life cycle of this needs list. And it begins with the continued identification of these research needs from EMA's committees, working parties and staff, but also crucially through you all, our external stakeholders. Next, please. And we'll screen these newly identified needs and then update this needs list periodically. Next slide, please. And we're hoping that this needs list will enable the conduct of this regulatory science research. And that can be through attracting the interest of researchers or working with research funders at the EU level. And we'll be hearing from Carmen on that later to give a funder's perspective, but also national and private funders, such as NGO funders. And we also want to, as I said, host experts in-house to deliver some of these research needs. Next slide, please. And these research will end up in results, many of which will lead to updated regulatory guidelines, standards, and practices. And in turn, this will lead to updated scientific advice and then improved medicines development and patient access. And like all good research, it will undoubtedly often end with the phrase, further research should. And so if you pick next, please. That completes the cycle of this needs initiative. And I just want to go through one more lap with you, giving the concrete example that Li-Fang provided earlier on the complex clinical trials and the need for regulatory science research to facilitate their use. So this need was identified by a number of stakeholders in the interviews that led up to this initiative. And so we included it in this first draft of the needs list. And indeed, this stakeholder input was part of the reason why last week the Accelerating Clinical Trial Initiative, a multi-stakeholder platform, was launched. And I encourage you all to look into that platform. And so we're going to feed ACT EU, as it's called, with this research need and other relevant research needs. And if they are chosen to be conducted, they'll lead to results. In this case, one would imagine updated clinical guidelines on the use of complex clinical trials and updated regulatory advice, therefore, and then enhanced use of these complex clinical trials in medicines development, and therefore enhanced patient access to new medicine. Next slide, please. But why should you engage with the regulatory science research need list? I'm sure you have a number of other good causes to address. Well, it's this impactful chain of translation from research into regulatory practice and therefore into medicines development and public health that we see as the value of this initiative. And we offer scientific exchange to try and ensure that translation and ensure that impact, as well as agency amplified dissemination of the research results through our regulatory network, but also through events and publications. And finally, we want to hear your thoughts on what other regulatory science research needs exist to influence the future iterations of this needs list. Next slide, please, Romana. And so you and other stakeholders are absolutely key in delivering the impact of this initiative. And so if you have any general or topic specific comments, please send them in to the email address at the bottom there. Equally, we'd love to hear if you are interested in researching or funding any of these research needs lists, and please let us know and we'll get back to you. We're also keen to hear about your existing research on any of these topics, or, as I said, if there are any topics which you feel should be on a future iteration of this list, please let us know at regulatory.science@ema.europa.eu. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening to this introduction, and thanks, Li-Fang, for your presentation, and thanks also, Ralph and Tony, for your tireless support in bringing this initiative alive. And we'd also like to thank Marissa Papaluca, Angela Brand, and Richard Guy for their helpful thoughts in shaping and work in shaping this initiative. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Ralph now, who will take you through the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Heinz. Thank you, Phil. Welcome to you all to the first question and answer session. We focus in this session on the regulatory science, on the background of the research needs that the agency has published, and on the activities that the agency is doing for regulatory science research. So thank you all for entering your questions in the Slido web tool. Please continue to do so. We're happy to have received the first 6 questions. Thank you for continuing to do so because we can see your questions live, and this allows us to promptly respond to you. And this gives us a bit of interaction with you in this virtual meeting setting. So those questions that we cannot answer today, we will see to answer them in writing after the webinar. So I welcome everyone to the panel. I especially welcome Mr. Francois Huyes, who joins us from EURORDIS, the European Organization for Rare Diseases, where Francois is a director and advisor. And Francois also represents EURORDIS in our Patients and Consumers Working Party. Thank you very much for joining. Also, welcome to colleagues from across the agency who have contributed to collect the regulatory science research needs topics from their respective areas. And we have Marcia Rückbal from the Task Force Data Analytics. There's Ivana Silva from the Department Public and Stakeholders Engagement, Sheila Kennedy from the Digital Business Transformation Task Force, and Savik Kurz, also from the Task Force Data Analytics. Thank you all very much for joining this morning. To start, please, Mr. Huyes, Francois, could you share some of your reflections on how patients and patient organizations are now also involved in regulatory science research, joining the efforts to improve the tool sets and the standards of regulatory science? Thank you.
Thank you, Raf, and good morning to all. I'd like also to remind that from the very moment the Patients and Consumers Working Party was established at the EMA, we immediately starting to discuss with colleagues at EMA to revise everything we thought needed to be revised. It started with other activities, but in particular with a joint discussion with healthcare professionals on what we mean by benefit risks as part of a joint discussion managed by Laurent Brassard and your colleagues, followed by also the benefit risk methodology project, and then the IMI Protect project, which was led by Xavier Kurz. And I remember Xavier saying that it was the first research in regulatory science in Europe, at least for the last 20 years, where we tested many new techniques and methods which are very promising for some, and we were particularly interested by the research by IMI Protect on direct-to-patient pharmacovigilance, on the visualization of benefits and risks, on analytic methods to explore databases. And here, I think it's something that will really require more attention. I remember the presentation of research done where the same analytic method applied to different databases would generate different results, or different methods applied to the same database would also generate different results. So we are focusing, and that's a research need, to identify these sources of data, but it's only the first step. To come to an agreement on different analytic methods that exist will also be the key element for these data to be useful. Then we had different discussions on the regulatory science strategies with consultations by your colleagues, questionnaires, interviews, very rich discussions where we could see if, for example, patients and healthcare professionals were aligned or had different priorities or research needs. To the question, which are the top 3 science, technology, and regulatory challenges that you have, and really focusing on rare disease, which is my domain, I think 2 main ones appeared in our discussions. The need to innovate in clinical trials, and this is where we are also involved with different stakeholders. I can think, for example, of the working group of the European Federation of Internal Medicine with Dr. Lorenzo Dagna, who is advocating and using Bayesian inference methods. We know in rare disease, there is no point to say that we need hundreds of thousands of patients in randomized clinical trial double-blinded. there are so many situations where this will not be possible. So we need to develop other methods. And we are very much involved with OrphanDev and other actors to explore new types of clinical trials, new designs, new statistical methods to conduct research in very small populations of patients. That's an extremely important priority to us. And we are also extremely interested by research that can help to really establish the needed synergies between the regulators and HTA. I think for this, we also need to come to different methods to validate surrogate markers. The current standards are very demanding, very sophisticated, and there are good reasons for that. But we know that the current standards make it absolutely difficult in rare diseases to validate the surrogate markers. So this is another domain where we need to be imaginative and to revise how we validate these markers. We also need to think of methods that will use maybe not big data, but as Julian Isla from Dravet syndrome explained, smart data. When joining clinical trials, we have the study visits. At each study visits, we collect data, but maybe there are other tools which could help generate many more data. If, for example, we use devices from home, or if we have possibilities to report outcomes ourselves. So all this research on patient-relevant outcomes, patient-reported outcomes measure is certainly also a field which would help compensate for the lack of large populations of patients. And I could continue with many research needs that we have, but I think it's also extremely important for ensuring the right dialogue with HTA, that we develop methods on relative efficacy to explore for all the medicines for which we cannot have the clinical trials, we cannot compare head-to-head all treatments together. We need to agree and to explore analytic methods from other sources of data than clinical trials, medical records, health databases, and registries, to compare outcomes in similar patients using different treatments to inform the decision makers, both the regulators and HTA. We also, and there are different international and European initiatives. I could name the HTX project and others, exploring also the use of this real world data, and also methods to better scan the horizon to detect which promising medicines are approaching the market, to guide also the need for more iterative scientific advice as done in PRIME, but also to guide the discussions for the patients when we have a limited population and different developments simultaneously, which one to choose. And this is where we could also benefit from some research done to help not predict, but help decide which are really the unmet needs and which development could answer these unmet needs, rather than to join the first to come development, which is not always the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Francois, for the many touch points that you mentioned where patient involvement is closely linked to these activities. And we start now with questions that link to that and come back to the bigger question of how this initiative has been informed by previous work and other funding projects so far, and go a little bit back to the operating model. So the first question we will take is, how can we be involved in the regulatory science research discussions? And please, could I ask Ivana to start first and then Lifang to briefly complement.
Hello. So indeed, the agency has, since its inception, been interacting with stakeholders and developed specific frameworks of interaction with stakeholders, namely with patient organizations, with healthcare professionals, with industry associations, and of course with academia. And we have specific frameworks for that. We do realize that it's important to bring the different stakeholders around the table, and therefore this multi-stakeholder approach is something that we very much encourage, and we bring opportunities to develop multi-stakeholder initiatives, multi-stakeholder platforms, multi-stakeholder events. And therefore, this is always also the spirit to develop the research regulatory, the regulatory science research needs. So in that sense, there are already specific networks of organizations that are collaborating with EMA, but we continuously want to expand and map additional stakeholders, which can range from organizations, European, international, and also national, and individuals who can really bring their expertise in and into the discussions. So we are obviously developing for the years to come a multi-stakeholder engagement strategy, which would encompass these points and opportunities where different stakeholders come together. But what I would like to indicate here is that it's very important that we know of your interest, we know who you are, we map who you are, so we can continue the exchange, and we can make you aware of the opportunities for such multi-stakeholder discussions. So in that sense, it is very welcome that you approach us and you come to us to let us know of your areas of interest and let us know who you are, so we can continue this open communication, and we can really identify the opportunities and work together with you. There are specific ways to do that. We have tools to map our stakeholders, but I think also Lifang would like to expand on that. But I would just give you this aspect that also with our EMA website, you can actually have access to additional information on how we are engaging with the different stakeholders. There are dedicated web pages where you can find continuously information about what's happening, and you can also see what are the contact points to reach us. So I think in very high level, this would be the initial kind of exchange, and we can further develop. Ralph, over to you, and perhaps Lifang would like also to complement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana. Thank you so much. Can I shortly compliment? Okay, so because we are working in the academia liaison office, and this research needs is highly academia driven, and we would like to receive your request by clicking the link on each of the research needs. If you are interested in that specific research needs, it will come to us. Alternatively, you can also approach academia mailbox of the EMA, and we will take a further discussion with you to explore what can we support you to the best level. And that's it. Hand it over to you, Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you, Lifang and Ivana. And there's now a last question in this first session, and this will go back a little bit on the operating model. It's to Phil, please, if you could address when will be the next version prepared, but also which type of deliverables are we anticipating and how we are going to handle this? Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Ralph. And thanks very much for a good question. In terms of the next version of this needs list, we're going to see the volume of new research needs that come in, and then update the needs list accordingly. So we're envisaging an update sometime this year, but as to when exactly that will be in this year, we're not yet sure. But when we do update it, we'll communicate it and we'll make clear which of those research needs lists are new. In terms of the deliverables that we're foreseeing to come out of this research, we didn't want to be too prescriptive, because there's a huge variety of different research needs identified, and each of those will require their own research methodologies and therefore result in different deliverables. But we're happy to work with researchers and funders interested in delivering these research needs to work out which deliverable or which result would be the most appropriate to address that need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. This was very clear. I wonder if you would want to continue perhaps a bit and elaborate on how, for the creation of the current regulatory science research needs list, previous work was considered, and there's a question on how tools and results that are currently under development have been used, and also going a bit deeper into the learning cycle, in which way industry and pharmaceutical companies, commercial developers are being involved as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So in drawing up this research needs list, we conducted these 70 stakeholder interviews. That's 70, not 17. And that was across stakeholder groups. And therefore, we had quite a wide net capturing ongoing initiatives and ongoing and existing regulatory science research needs. But we also looked at other regulatory science research initiatives or agendas, and particularly at the EU level with IMI, now IHI, and Horizon Europe. And we'll be hearing more about that later, but we've tried to ensure that there's a good synergy there and there's not any duplication. And we'll continue to do this going forward. In terms of industry involvement in the regulatory science research needs life cycle, industry are obviously key in regulatory science. It's their bread and butter. They do it day in, day out, and also have a key role in regulatory science research itself in developing new methods and in participating in IMI. And so they are a key stakeholder in delivering this initiative. But the reason that we've targeted this document more towards other stakeholders at the present time is because we recognize that in order for regulatory science to keep a pace with innovation in medicines development, we need a cross-sectoral approach. So we need all hands on deck, as it were, including researchers, funders, patients, healthcare professionals to do that. And that's why this initiative has been targeted as it has, but that's not to say that we aren't hoping for a really strong industry involvement. And on the life cycle, it says researchers, and by researchers we also mean industry, but perhaps I should have clarified that verbally. I hope that helps.
Yes, I think it does, Phil. Thanks very much for laying it out so clearly. There is one concrete question with which I would like to close the question and answer session, and this is what happens after I send this email. Perhaps if Lifang or Phil, you could make a start, and I'm sure we will, along the further discussion in question and answer session 2, get more to know about it. But what happens after we receive the email from interested parties? And Lifang, if you want to start.
Thank you. So colleagues, when you send a question to us by clicking that link, which I repeated 3 times already, we will receive it and we will note it down, and then we will examine your question. And if the question is related to a topic that we are also engaging on internally, we will consult our internal colleagues to get a collective answer back to you. And perhaps we will have an exploratory meeting with you, and we take the discussion further down the road. But certainly you will get a reply from us right after you send it to us. Phil, perhaps you would like to compliment if I missed something? Thank you.
No, Lifang, that's great. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for this. And again, there are different situations that we anticipate you are in when you're contacting us. So we're looking forward and have already received the first interactions. So with that, I would like to thank all the panelists for the answers, also for the questions. Please continue to put them in Slido. We will try to address them in the next session. Thank you. With this, I close it and hand back over to Dr. Humphreys. Tony.
Okay, no, thanks very much for that, Ralph. And again, keep those questions coming, because we do have a good slot now towards the end of the morning. And we can indeed recycle some of those, particularly the ones that were concerning funding, because that sort of is reflected in the next sequence we go into. So it's a great pleasure for me now to introduce a series of presentations, and we're kicking off with Professor Richard Guy, who currently is Professor of the Department of Pharmacy, Pharmacology, University of Bath. He's had a very interesting sort of background exposure with different universities globally, a spell in University of California, but also in Geneva as well, before he's ended up in Bath. And in particular, we have to acknowledge that Professor Guy spent some time with us here at the agency, and he was particularly involved in opening up that strategic goal 5 in our RSS strategy to 25, which Li Fang and Phil highlighted in their presentation. And that did sort of set the basis then by which we extended this initiative to try to put some flesh on the bone with regards to what are the research needs of the regulators. So that's pretty much just to identify Professor Guy as being involved in that initiative, and he's now had the courage to come back and give us his academic perspective on the continuous need for regulatory scientific research from his perspective. So please, over to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Tony. And it is indeed a pleasure to be back, so to speak, and to be taking part in this this launch event. Given the amount of work that went behind trying to pull this together and to really create a policy for moving forward. So with that, let me get going. If I could have the next slide, please, Lucia, that would be great. So why should we do this? And I think everyone knows what the EMA's role is with respect to protecting and improving human health and catalyzing and enabling good science to be translated into proper care of patients. And to do that, we need to be in complete control of the relevant science that's involved and how application of that science in any review of drug products and approval thereof takes place. And that means that the EMA really has to be critically informed of what's going on. And a lot of scientific innovation, of course, comes out of academia. Academics sometimes can figure out what the potential of that scientific innovation is, but I think with some input from the agency and from regulators in general, that could be made to work a lot more efficient. And of course, having a handle on that then makes everything that is the business of EMA work much better in terms of scientific advice, risk-benefit analysis, and so on. So that's why we're having this conversation, and I think it's terrific that it's happening now. So next slide, please. Well, from the regulator's standpoint, then, if you do make fundamental discoveries in biomedical science, and you want to then translate that into clinical practice, then you've got to have the right procedures to evaluate the things that agencies do with respect to safety, efficacy, and quality. And the role of the regulatory science bit then is to produce the basic knowledge essential to make the decision making of the regulator as robust as possible. And then what that means is that we get good products out of at the end of the pipeline. And academia is a significant resource to enable that to happen in terms of the facilities that exist there, the people who are there, the grey matter that those people have. And that allows the regulator then to pose questions which I think can entice academics into this particular business. And of course, the way that works particularly well is when there's cash involved and there's money and funding to support what needs to be done. Now, the regulator and the academic come together because scientific research depends on testing hypotheses and doing experiments. And regulatory science is exactly the same. There's no difference there. And the questions that regulators have come from the most active and competitive areas of biomedical science, because that's where the innovation originates. That may be in industry, that may be in academia, but eventually that's what's key to moving the field forward. And the document that Phil and Li-Fang have been discussing identifies lots of potential areas where there are clear research questions that need to be addressed, and I've listed some of those here. And as I said, I think academics, when presented with challenges from regulatory science, will respond, particularly if there's funding that's there. And that means that there's the opportunity, I think, to create a proper synergistic collaborative partnership between regulators and academics. One word I didn't put in here on my slide, but I think is really important, I've heard someone use it already, is the impact that this can have. And the impact, of course, at the end of the day, is making good medicines accessible to as many people as possible. But academics, when they hear the word impact, they're thinking about, the next cycle of research funding, the next cycle of their promotion up the academic ladder, and so on. And this is an opportunity where doing good science really does give the opportunity for people to develop proper impact that's clearly identifiable as something that's been translated out of an academic laboratory into practice in some way to the benefit of more than just the academic doing the science. And I think that's a real key. So the mechanism by which this is going to happen, and which has been outlined already, of course, is some sort of synergistic collaboration between EMA and the European Regulatory Network and academic research centres to establish some new science and innovation platforms. And these platforms or collaborations should undertake fundamental research in these strategic key areas of regulatory science that have been identified in the document, and also really take the opportunity to react more quickly when emerging innovations or emerging healthcare emergencies, so to speak, arise, and need in a relatively short period of time some new regulatory competency or methods or tools to be developed. And so, what's important then is to identify what these research priorities are, and that really can promote regulatory science. And that, of course, includes the breakthrough research. It includes developing new tools. It includes education and scientific exchange. I mean, I think one of the key things which has popped out of what I've been listening to here is this idea that, there should be free sort of interchange between academics and regulators in both a physical and intellectual way, because that really does catalyze, I think, some proper thinking across these two disciplines, as it were. And at the bottom, you can see how that can impact on fundamental research, really addressing short-term applied questions, how you can get, young people educated in and thinking about regulatory science early on, and not arriving at, as I did, at a relatively let's say advanced stage in terms of what the value of that can be, generating manpower for the regulators and for industry, people who can then work in that area, getting people trained, getting information disseminated, and getting, continuing to update the horizon scan that was conducted before the regulatory science strategy came out, and being aware of what's coming as early as possible. So I think there's a clear justification for some sort of paradigm shift in regulatory science and innovation, and the EMA and the European Regulatory Network is well placed to do that, because there's lots going on in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry in Europe. There's lots of high-level regulatory expertise at EMA and other agencies across Europe, and there's lots of good science going on in various European universities. And so this relationship and partnership between EMA, the regulatory network, academia, and as has been pointed out, with the pharmaceutical industry, offers a real opportunity to make this translation of clever research into new products be facilitated, to get new tools to facilitate regulatory review and approval, and ultimately to get good medicines in the hands of patients more quickly. Next slide, please. And I think the return on investment, you can see that this is a good thing to do. And I will talk a little bit about the US FDA here, because they've been thinking about this for a while. They've been recycling the user fees that they charge into improving regulatory science, and they've established now a number of these so-called centers of excellence in regulatory science and innovation across the US, each with a particular focus that's been identified as a key agency priority area. I've been associated with the UCSF Stanford Center, and their focus, a lot of there is on pharmacogenetics, for example, and other particular aspects, particularly innovative clinical trials and so on. But they provide training and educational programs, internships, lab rotations, not just for PhD students and postdocs, but also for faculty and scientists going into industry, and for FDA scientists coming into the university to understand and be brought up to speed of some of the new innovation that's going on. And I would add that they've also just funded a Centre for Research on Complex Generics. I know EMA doesn't really deal tremendously with run-of-the-mill generics, if you like, but certainly with biosimilars, it's heavily involved. And I think it's an area where there should be some attention paid, and the FDA has recognised this because of accessibility and bringing down the cost of medicines in the US to make generic products more widely available to more people over here. And these centres are supported on 5-year funding cycles that are supported by user fees. And I think that new complex generics facility, for example, has received a $5 million award for a 5-year period. So there's some serious money being invested in this regulatory science activity elsewhere. And there are seeds in Europe where, our review a couple of years ago identified some obvious areas of strength in Europe, and these need to be evolved and developed. And the next slide, please. So I think this just sort of summarises the path from the regulatory science, the 2025 document, to this launch of the research needs, and exactly what there is, the partnerships to do fundamental research, to leverage these collaborations between academia and network scientists to address rapidly emerging questions when they come up, really to better identify and access the best expertise across Europe, and to disseminate that and share the knowledge, expertise, innovation across the network and to its stakeholders. And investment is the key. And I leave that as, with just some suggestions there. And obviously that's pretty much the next topic on the agenda, I think, for today. And that's important. And so my final slide, please. Just some acknowledgements, particularly to my colleagues during my secondment at the EMA in 2019, Tony, Phil, who you've heard from already, but Marissa, Lucia Dapote, Letitia and Aline as well, were tremendously entertaining colleagues to work with when I was with the agency. I would point out that my research has been supported in Bath for the last several years by the FDA and their Office of Generic Drugs. And I have to say that nothing I've said today has anything to do with them. It's all my own thoughts on this subject. And I'd be happy to answer any questions in the Slido as they come in. Thank you.
Yep. Many thanks for that, for sharing those reflections with us, Richard. Very rich, and in particular the rationale for collaboration, the fact that the academics in Europe represent a significant resource reservoir of grey matter that needs to be, fully utilised to deliver maximum impact. The benefits of synergistic sort of partnership, in particular the case for free interchange between regulators and academia both ways, and in a learning regulatory system. And then you did provide a very nice connection to our next speaker about academics will respond with the right funding. And I couldn't get a better bridge myself to our next speaker. And it's a great pleasure for me personally to welcome Carmen La Plaza Santos, who's the Head of Health Innovations and the Ecosystems Unit at DG RTD of the European Commission. And of course, then, and Carmen, we've had a number of exchanges, so she's very familiar with our evolution of this initiative and has been very supportive in the recent contacts. And it's really a personal pleasure for me to welcome her here to share her reflections at this launch event. So please, Carmen, over to you.
Thanks a lot for this really warm welcome. I also appreciated a lot the contacts that we have had, and I am very happy to be here with you this morning. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. So, yeah, I am heading the unit Health Innovation Ecosystems in DG Research in the European Commission, and actually the focus of our on the treaties, on the mandate that the Union receives to set up research programs to contribute to the objective achieving a European research area, and also to encourage the European competitiveness also of industry. So my unit is responsible to set up a research and innovation agenda in different fields of healthcare, such as the field of rare diseases or personalized medicine, advanced therapies, the transformation of healthcare systems, or the impact of environment in health. And we are also responsible for regulatory science research. So this is fully in the scope of our activities. We can go to the next slide. Obviously, our main instrument in order to achieve our aims is Horizon Europe, the new research and innovation framework program of the European Union for this new multi-annual framework 2021-2027. I will not talk a lot because I think this is quite known, but just to say that this program is obviously building on predecessors. It's also structured in 3 pillars, and this slide reflects a little bit the 3 pillars that are tackled through Horizon Europe: basic science, of global challenges, and also the boosting of the industry, mainly through the creation of the new European Innovation Council. The main objective of Horizon Europe is to try to provide a solution to this problem quite well known of how Europe is lagging behind in the translation of excellent science research into an innovation that really has a beneficial impact on our economy and also our of life. So maybe, and maybe you can click now in the slide just to say that actually Horizon Europe main focus is the achievement of impact. This really defines the orientation, how the topic will be written, because we want to really provide an answer to this lagging behind. And in this spirit, Horizon Europe will be looking for much more synergies than in the past with EU funding programs, but also with national programs in order to encourage the faster uptake of research results at national and regional level, but also synergies in the policy making with other European Union to increase the overall role of research in policymaking. And therefore, in this context, the engagement with the stakeholders, engagement with other actors is essential. Co-creation is one of the main words we mention when we talk about Horizon Europe. So engagement with regulators, engagement with you is very important for us, and that's why it's a pleasure to be here today. Is impact driven. That's the most important thing to retain. And so our action basically of the unit I'm heading is on the cluster 1 on health, which is in the second pillar, tackling global challenges. The budget of health cluster is 8.2 billion for the 7 years. And the main rationale for the cluster is to respond to the challenge that the demographic change represents for healthcare, but also to the need of greater resilience and equity in the healthcare systems, as the COVID crisis, just as an example, has proved. It is expected that research and innovation has an important role to tackle the challenges that the healthcare sector is facing by either advancing knowledge and capabilities, by advancing also improving the understanding of health and disease, by developing innovative methodological and technological solutions to better manage health and disease, and also to design sustainable approaches for the digital transformation and the delivery of person-centered and equitable health and care services. This is really very important. So the digital transformation, the person-centered are somehow horizontal priorities all along the health cluster. But, and now we can click on the next slide, obviously the innovation and healthcare, in order to achieve, to be translated for benefits to the society, for benefits to healthcare professionals, for benefits to the citizens and patients, requires a parallel advancement in regulatory science. This is fundamental, and that's why we can move to the next slide. And research will have much more importance in Horizon Europe that it had into predecessors because of this impact-driven focus that I mentioned. Because regulatory science is aiming precisely to tackling this gap between the research and the actual delivery of research results to the market on those who produce them, it will be a priority. It will be a priority for us, in particular in the health sector, where this gap is particularly longer than in other sectors. So certainly it will be supported in the context of our topics in Horizon Europe. And as I will mention a little bit later, it will be also crucial in the research agenda of the Innovative Health Initiative, the new partnership that was launched at the end of last year. So the objective will be to provide data, more data, but also to develop tools, models, methods that will facilitate the evaluation, but that will also support the regulatory decision making. Essential to engage with regulators, and mainly because of two reasons. On the one hand, as I told you, Horizon Europe was a co-created program, and it is essential to see what the needs of the regulator are. Just by answering to your needs, we will be able to achieve the impact we are looking for. So it is fundamental, and that's why we were very enthusiastic to collaborate with you to help you as much as possible in the excellent work that you have been doing with these needs that you are launching today from of the research on the regulatory science. Several of the questions of the research questions that are part of this agenda are really very much relevant to our own objectives and to our actions foreseen in this field. And the second way in which we would like to engage with regulators would be also in the context of the projects we are funding and supporting. We believe that encouraging these proposed projects that are starting to engage from the onset with regulators can really simplify the complexity afterwards, and can really maybe reduce the necessary time in order to have the those projects into the market. So for all topics that where it will, and we will encourage the early engagement with regulators from the onset. We can go through the next slides. Next slide, sorry. So as I said, the main focus of regulatory science research in the context of will be tackled by one of our destinations, working the Cluster 1 Health, at least in the first strategic plan that will cover the first 4 years of Europe. Will be split into 6 destinations, which are not silos. There will be a lot of collaboration and topics that could be supported under different destinations. So even though Destination 6, which is mainly targeting the health industry, will be the more natural place in order to support regulatory science, I would invite you to look at all of them. And in particular, afterwards, I will show you an example which precisely supported by Destination 5. So Destination 6 is the destination that is more looking at the health industry, which is a key driver for growth and which has the capacity to provide some of those innovations that are really representing important opportunities for the patients and for the healthcare providers. And it is important to consider that the strengthening of the single market that the European Union is focusing on includes creating knowledge and developing guidelines for stakeholders, for regulators to ensure that adoption of innovations that support the sustainability while promoting access and reducing the inequalities in health. All aspects are tremendously important in our cluster health. We can move to the next slide. Yes, you might click again because we have different funding. I will not go through all of them. We do provide individual grants. We do also provide support to procurers. I think that from the perspective of regulatory science, the main opportunities would be in the context of either grants to collaborative projects, like the sort of topics that we usually funded under Societal Challenge 1 in Horizon 20, or that we will support under the Cluster 1 Health, multi-international consortia proposing projects on specific topics in response to call for proposals. As I said, it will be mainly under Destination 6 from regulatory science perspective, and also through partnerships. I will explain more in detail Innovative Health Initiative afterwards. We can move to the next slide. Just to point at 2 examples of concrete support to regulatory that you can see in the Work Programme 21-22 in the perspective of the open that is currently open until April now, and that it provides to what was mentioned by several of our prior speakers on the challenge or the opportunities offered by the real world data for regulatory decision making. Also, another example with another instrument, because the prior is research, an instrument on the co-funds like the PARC, which we co-fund together with member states on the assessment of risk from chemicals. And the last, the Innovative Health Initiative, as I mentioned, a new partnership between the European Union and several health industry sectors, building on the success of the Innovative Medicine Initiative that was mainly a partnership with the pharmaceutical industry, so expanding now to other health industry sectors. And precisely the focus of this initiative will be the cross-sectoriality. That will be one of the main characters of this new initiative. It will be flexible as concerns the disease areas, as long as addressing an unmet public health need, and it will cover the full life cycle from prevention until disease management. It will be all active during the 7 years of this new multi-annual framework with a total budget of 2.4 billion. We can move to the next slide, where maybe I will show you more the regulatory science focus of this initiative that is primarily due to the cross-sectoriality and to the fact that the combination of different types of technologies and services does pose some particular regulatory challenges. So this initiative will try to provide an answer to that by establishing a continued and trusted dialogue between the industry and regulators. There will be opportunities for regulators to provide early input into the activities of the Innovative Health Initiative via the one of the advisory bodies that will soon be called for to be built, the Science and Innovation Panel, and to provide more details on what will be exactly the scope. The Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda will be published very soon. Still in the month of January. And next slide, which will be marked as the slide that just to give you an example of what will be mainly the actions that you can expect from this initiative. Please see here the first topics that will be supported at this time still draft topics that have been, I think, published last week. This gives you an idea of what kind of topics will be funded. And very important to keep in mind that this initiative remains at the competitive level. So it is not aiming at delivering products or service directly into healthcare systems, but to promote the pre-competitive collaboration between the different sectors and the academia. And as I mentioned, very important to engage with different types of interlocutors, regulators being one of those actors that will be essential. And that's all for my part. Thanks a lot. And I remain here available in case of questions. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks for that, Carmen. That's a very, very broad landscape that you were able to summarize in the short space of time we were able to allow you, and that's incredibly helpful. And hopefully then our own modest initiative in putting these needs into the public domain will actually impact on those various agendas that you've described, both at the very highest level under the Broad Horizon Europe and the health cluster, but then more specifically then as you finished off with the Innovative Health Initiative and the various opportunities of collaboration that they represent. So that's really fantastic. Thank you for that. And indeed, it'll be great if you can stay for the Q&A to follow. And if I can move on, and I think it's a very nice bridge then from Carmen sort of outlining the short-term immediate perspectives for funded research in the regulatory science space, in enabling the sort of translation of the more fundamental science and innovation in the healthcare area. The next speaker then is Professor Franz Kunig, who's currently a professor specializing in medical statistics at the Medical University of Vienna. And again, we have to sort of put hands up. Franz has had prior exposure to the European Medicines Agency, maybe not so recent as Professor Guy, but certainly around about 2008, 2010, which seems quite some time ago. But he developed his interest there in various aspects of complex clinical trial designs, multiple testing, flexible systems, etc. And he's a lot of exposure and experience of EU-funded projects on adaptive designs in the Research Product Ideal, also in Marie Curie funded projects on early development studies, and he's currently active in the EU Perl project as Work Package 2 co-lead. So no better man in terms of having direct hands-on experience of regulatory science related type projects. And please, Franz, if you can give us your perspective on this initiative that we're attempting to launch today. Thank you.
So, Tony, really many thanks for this nice and kind introduction. It's really a long time ago, and also for the opportunity to present today. So congratulations really to you and CMA for this new initiative, and especially to the new list on open regulatory science topics. Next slide, please. As a statistician, so what makes a methodological research topic relevant for regulatory science? First, we want to identify and tackle problems relevant for drug development and regulatory decision-making, like in statistics, adaptive designs, multiplicity, and so on. And we want to develop methods and designs complying with current regulatory standards and guidelines, which might be a little bit boring. More exciting is really contributing to evolving regulatory standards by scientific papers, guidelines, and advices. And finally, applying new methodological methods developed in clinical trials and in drug development programs. Next slide, please. So who is interested in regulatory science topics? Immediately you will realize that it's not only regulators itself, but it includes other stakeholders as well, like HDAs, the pharmaceutical industry, CROs, trial-sponsored ethics committee, and patients and publics. And hopefully all of them can be involved as potential collaborators. And one main source for funding are public programs reaching from local, national funding, cross-country funding, to large European funding program as described before. And similarly, as the regulatory and science topic should be of interest for industry as well, also pharma funding is of relevance for academia. And the type of support and funding includes full research project, grants for PhDs or postdocs, internships and research visits, or also access to data. Next slide, please. So let's start on how regulatory interest and funding emerged in adaptive design as an example. So in 1989, Peter Bauer published his seminal paper on confirmatory adaptive designs. The work was triggered by his work in the ethics committee and how amendments were handled or not handled in the statistical analysis later on. And in the beginning, here in Europe, adaptive designs were considered as a kind of absurdity of academia and the German-speaking. And in the initial days, it was really hard to get funding. But when more and more companies became interested in implying such adaptive designs, also regulators reacted by organizing workshops and issuing guidelines. So the EMA reflection paper was the first being published in 2007, and then other agencies followed. And as there was then a worldwide interest in adaptive designs, now even on the ICH level, a guideline is developed, the E20. When people realize that regulatory agencies are open to discuss this type of designs, this really triggered a lot of research and also made it easier to acquire the necessary funding. So here, regulators really play an important role for funding. And if you're interested on the history of adaptive designs, have just a look at our 25 years paper, which is also discussed by regulators and industry statisticians. Next slide. Yeah. So concerning funding, also academic secondments to EMA enabled further research, like shown here, like the analysis on how adaptive design methodologies are used in drug development programs and what are the open gaps. On the left-hand side, you can see a paper on which scientific advices were given by the EMA Scientific Advice Working Party, and on the right-hand side, what happened to these proposals later in marketing authorization procedures. And such papers really helped us to define further methodological research questions. Next slide. So how was the research on adaptive design initially funded at our department? In the early days, mainly by university means, and later on by national funding mainly. For example, in Austria, the Austrian Science Fund funded several methodological projects on this topic. They also funded special mobility programs for young researchers, where people from us stayed sometime abroad at other institutions, which gave us also new insight. And especially cross-country funding also helped to facilitate to conduct research visits and to conduct joint workshops. For example, in one joint program with Japan, we also involved the Japanese regulator, PMDA. Next slide. At the end of the day, also the results of adaptive designs should be reported adequately, addressing the need of all stakeholders. And for example, here the NIHR and the MRC funded a project to develop an extension to the consort statement for adaptive designs. And one factor for the successful application and conduct was that regulators worldwide were invited to join the core research group or to participate in the Delphi process when developing the guideline. And to allow for such a broad involvement, you should always foresee sufficient budget to enable the traveling of your international collaborators. And by the way, if you're interested in consort, now there's also an extension developed on early phase clinical trials. Next slide. So based on my experience, what are real boosters for regulatory research and collaborations among relevant stakeholders? First, organize dedicated conferences or panel sessions together with learned societies and invite regulators. And one of the main boosters was always when the EMA organized a workshop on statistical topics such as adaptive designs, multiplicity, or extrapolation, to name some of them. And also when there are plans to issue or to revise an EMA concept paper or guidelines, also this triggered further methodological research. And really an important role to play research visits like university secondments to EMA or to industry, just to share ideas and pick up ideas. And I think the biggest booster is clearly if there are dedicated European calls on topics of regulatory interests, as pointed out before. Next slide. So here you can find an example of such a specific call to enhance statistical methodology for small population. The EU funded 3 FP7 projects on this topic, and I think the strong regulatory involvement was really a key factor for success for all three projects. For example, CEMA hosted several workshops, for example, a joint dissemination workshop of all three projects in 2017, and this ensured a much higher visibility compared to having had separate standalone workshop for each of the three projects. And in this process, CEMA also involved learned societies, and this facilitated really a follow-up research call funded by the European Joint Programme on Rare Diseases, where the demonstrations projects are now going on. Next slide. And here you can see an example how the work on extrapolation addressed some regulatory science topics. The research team involved also some members with a strong regulatory background, like we involved Christoph Mahle and Peter Bauer, who were PDCO members at these days, and which really ensured to identify the relevant problems. And the research was also hugely stimulated by discussing the EMA concept paper and also by the workshop CEMA hosted at this time on this topic. So within the project, we developed methods to formalize how much evidence is needed in trials for children, but to ensure that methods are really taken up, we really learned that it's not sufficient just to publish the methods paper, but you also have to publish papers, more general paper where you outline how the new methods can be embedded in the current regulatory system, like shown here on the right-hand side. Next slide. So beside such specific goals, I would really suggest that you look for funding sources without content restriction, and here really a great source for funding in Europe are the Marie Curie actions, because it allows you to tackle any research question which you want to tackle. And the Marie Curie actions are the European Union's reference program for doctoral education and postdoctoral training, and it offers 5 types of different programs, and I think especially the first to create for early stage researchers. And I will just now give you one example for such a doctoral network on the next slide. So here you can see the ideas improving design, evaluation and analysis of early drug development study, and each student was linked with a certain topic. Hopefully all of them were of interest for regulators, and to ensure that the right questions from a regulatory perspective were tackled, we also had the former chair of the Scientific Advice Working Party, Rob Hemmings, in our external advisory board. For example, let's look at the project on biosimilars, just to give you an impression how this worked. Next slide, please. So here you can see the sub-project on biosimilars. The student was hosted by Novartis, so she also got some insight of industry, and we also linked a clinical advisor to her who was a former CAT member, and the students did 2 reviews on how biosimilar programs look like based on CEMA's public assessment reports as a main data source, and these 2 reviews really helped to identify gaps, and for example 2 methods paper followed on how to quantify the totality of data in a more quantitative way for biosimilar development programs. Next slide, please. I mean, as stressed before, I think the gold standards IMI initiatives or the IHI initiative now. And here you can see how regulatory interaction were enforced in the ongoing EU Pearl project as an example. The EU Pearl project is a project to develop a framework for integrated research platform trials here in Europe. And to ensure that regulatory needs are adequately addressed, regulatory input is ensured on several levels, from having a regulatory authority as a full partner, so the Paul-Ehrlich Institute from Germany, to having an EMA representative in the advisory board. There are also 2 stakeholder workshops where we involve external regulators, and we also have interaction with CMA, like via the Innovation Task Force, with the CDFG, but also with the FDA, as usually such huge project development programs. And CEMA, as a IMI, also has a recommendation on how to engage with regulators if you want to get some ideas on how regulators can. So how to involve regulators in research project proposals. It's great to have them really as a full or as an associate partner or as host for secondments, as a member of an advisory board, or also as an external reviewer for a deliverable, or also by seeking regulatory advice, like for methods seeking, for example, for a qualification procedure. However, to do so, you really have to you have to foresee a sufficient budget already in the grant application. Next slide. So how can we find potential collaborators in the most efficient way? I think the most efficient way is still networking at conferences, at societies. So hopefully it will be possible later this year again. And you may also contact persons directly when you spot interesting papers, or you may use the partner search tool provided by the European Commission by using the keywords of interest. Next slide. So one more time, the EMA really has to be congratulated for having created an open-minded culture to discuss new methodologies for drug development. And this slide, but this slide is also a reminder that also a controversial discussion is needed to bring regulatory science forward. And I think the EMA cannot expect that for each problem there will be a solution at the end. And if the problems are interesting enough, hopefully many different research teams will provide also different solutions. And I think the EMA should not only rely on external research, but also be actively engaged in some research itself, which has been demonstrated over the last couple of years by many excellent publications by EMA colleagues. Next slide. So in the future, it would be great to have an easy way to include the EMA as a full partner, also in non-IMI or IHI project. And it would be good to have an advanced European educational program across countries and sectors to enhance regulatory science. And on the right-hand side, you can see our proposal for a new PhD program for quantitative methods for drug development. And I think if Europe has established such a network, then you have the next generation of promising scientists who are able to tackle regulatory science questions day by day. And for our next application, we will surely take the email list as a basis. And is it really worth all the efforts working on regulatory science topic? Yes, it is, because now looking back, now 4 former members of our department are now working for the Austrian regulatory agency. And remember the time back 20 years, there were almost no statisticians working at regulatory agency. So many thanks.
Yeah. No, many thanks to you, Franz, and that's a really fantastic presentation. It's very rich, very diverse, and it shows that, you know, regulatory science projects have been alive and well in Europe for many years, if not decades already, and with a variety of various funding instruments, and to some extent then the purpose of our initiative is simply just to sort of impact or to nudge some of these agendas forward in what we believe to be collectively a good direction, and maximize that impact on the results. But I was particularly taken with the fact that controversial discussions need to bring regulatory science forward, and that is absolutely the case. The need for regulators to have open mind and plasticity in thinking in order to create the space, the headroom for those innovative developments then to access the market and put novel treatments into the hands of patients and healthcare professionals, I believe is the overall drive. And there's so much rich food in that presentation. We indeed could do a follow-up session on that at some near future stage. So sincere thanks for that, Franz. So with that, then I hand over the floor to my colleague Ralph once again, and we pretty much take the Q&A session right up to midday. I know I have a wrap up, but as always, I think we'll give the priority to the Q&A so that some of you at least get some answers. And remember my commitment to you at the beginning of this lunch event that we would follow up in writing to other colleagues who we will not get to time to address live. So over to you, Ralph, please.
Thank you very much, Tony, and welcome to the second question and answer session, where we have the focus on collaboration between stakeholders, on funding, and on interacting with regulators. So we continue to pick the questions from Slido. There are many of them already, so thank you for writing the questions there. We can see them live, and that gives us a nice feeling of interaction in this virtual meeting, really. Thank you also for adding names to your questions, and as Tony has said, we might need to come back to you afterwards because there are so many questions. In addition to the presenters and the agency experts in the panel, I especially welcome to this panel also Dr. Lawrence O'Dwyer from the Irish Health of Products Regulatory Authority. And Larry is the co-chair of the EU Innovation Network of the Heads of Medicines Agencies and the EMA. So please, Larry, could you start with some remarks on regulatory science research from the perspective of the Innovation Network and the collaboration in the EU Medicines Regulatory Network, please? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Ralph, and good morning, everyone, and thanks to EMA for the invitation to participate. And I think it's been a very, very interesting morning, and I'd like to really welcome the publication of the EMA's regulatory science document. Ralph mentioned that I'm co-chair of the EU Innovation Network. That group brings together representatives from the EMA's Innovation Task Force and the innovation offices in national competent authorities right across Europe. And our focus is on supporting the development of innovative medicines and bringing together the related activities that are happening at both European and European and national level. And we've seen this morning that addressing key regulatory science questions is a really important consideration in that regard. I think Emer started the day, Emer Cook from the EMA, she mentioned the fact that the rapid pace that we're seeing in terms of scientific and technological progress, and that's absolutely true. And the reality is that progress that we're seeing in terms of science and technology in the areas that we regulate, it will require us as regulators to continue to adopt amended and new regulatory tools and approaches. And if we look at the external stakeholders, the pharma industry who are involved in developing medicines, for example, they are actively working with others. They're working with the medtech industry, obviously in the health space, but also with stakeholders who would have been traditionally outside of the health space or not necessarily focused on health, such as the general technology industries and data analytics experts. And so we as regulators, it would be, I suppose, naive and inappropriate for us to think that we can solve all the problems externally. We really need to work with others to leverage additional expertise and address important research questions. And for that reason, the EU Innovation Network has a specific focus on collaboration with others and working with various stakeholders. And that's really reflected, I think, in the EMA's Regulatory Science Research Network's needs document as well. So I just want to give some examples from an Irish perspective at a national level of some of the interactions we've had related to regulatory science very briefly. I think Richard mentioned biosimilars, and we had a project involving healthcare professionals, patients, and academic researchers. And I suppose it's a few years ago now, just I suppose to gauge the level of understanding amongst users in relation to biosimilars and developing communications as to how they're approved, the basis for the approval, and tackling that, I suppose, key issues in terms of biosimilars, which I think we've seen more data on in recent years, but it was certainly a key issue at the time related to interchangeability of biosimilars. And that was a really, really useful project from our perspective in addressing some key questions we had in that space and encouraging the uptake of biosimilars. We also worked with some academic researchers and industry in terms of a project on quality defects, analysing some of the trends that we were seeing, quality defects reported to us, some of the root causes, and really looking to identify preventative strategies with the view of reducing supply disruptions and recalls. And again, that was really useful work from our perspective. And then finally, the final one I just want to briefly mention is a more recent project in terms of risk minimization measures and their effectiveness. And we looked at risk minimization measures relating to sodium valproate, a medicine used in the treatment of epilepsy, and the associated pregnancy prevention program. and looking at the level of awareness of the risks and the familiarity with education materials. And that project was supported by one of our national health funding agencies. It had the involvement of patients, which is also very important, of course, the involvement of healthcare professionals as well. And that's really important to us as regulators, I think, to make sure that these risk minimization activities that we apply and work on with companies, that they're effective and they're actually achieving their end goals. So that's really, really important. So they're just some examples. Other national authorities will have similar activities at national level as well. And I think we've seen this morning, and I'll conclude on this, that there's really a wide variety of issues where regulatory science-related research can inform regulatory decision-making and most importantly, enable effective and appropriate regulation, which is what we want to do as competent authorities. So thanks for the opportunity to join, and I'll hand back to you now, Ralph.
And thank you very much, Larry, for showing how collaboration can make such a direct impact. And we're going to continue to take some questions along these lines. And there was a question asking, how will the interaction between the Committee for Advanced Therapies and the Regulatory Science Research Needs be working? And I take this as a question more in general, how do we involve scientific committees and working parties? And Lifang, if you could make a start, and after that we go questions on IHI, qualification procedure, and engagement of regulators and academia. Lifang, over to you on the engagement with the committees.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for bringing this question. And thank you for the question from the audience. I think this regulatory science research needs has been in close collaboration with the expert in the scientific committee when we develop this list. And of course, we will bring the regulatory research scientist to the committee and to the EMA topic experts to further contextualize the topic and bring collaborations together. So certainly we will bring this back to the scientific committee, not only limited to CAT and not only limited to certain topics. We will do a trans-topic interaction with the committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Lifang, for really clearly laying out that there is a role that we are playing in facilitating to create impact and therefore build on the exchanges. And the next question, please, can I suggest this to be for Carmen after presenting the Innovative Health Initiative? There was a question if the IMI Scientific Committee's recommendation for early engagement of applicants with regulators, how will this be taken up further by the Innovative Health Initiative? And how do you see this, Carmen, please?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so yes, in principle, of course, if the topics are relevant for engagement with regulators, which one can hope that will be the case for many of the Innovative Health Initiative topics, it will be encouraged to engage with them from the onset of the projects. This could happen in different forms, and I think it would be too premature to discuss here about how this potential collaboration would be. But in any case, the collaboration will be encouraged. This will happen already earlier, as I mentioned in my presentation. So even in the definition of these topics, the topics that will be put forward, the regulators will be part of these discussions through the Innovation and Science panel. But this is not only in the case of the Innovative Health Initiative. The same will apply in the context of our topics to be supported under Cluster 1, where we will also encourage for relevant topics the engagement with regulators. Of course, it will be up to the proposers to also reflect and engage. And from our side, what we are thinking on as well as is to help proposers with interaction with you, for example, through the organization of specific meetings with cluster of projects, when just before these projects start, to help them understand how to take into account regulatory concerns from the beginning of the preparation of their work. So this is something that we need to discuss more in detail in the weeks to come, but this would be one of the ways that we would see to facilitate the encouragement, because in some cases it would really be essential. But of course, we can tackle that in future interactions between your team and our team. Thanks.
Thank you, Carmen, and very happy to do so. So also please then watch the developments that are there, the new recommendations that will follow. And I think that's very nice to be followed up, to follow up these recommendations for engagement of researchers with regulators, maybe with a question to Richard, if I may, please, but also then handing over to Franz. Richard, briefly, do you see there's a reluctance of academicians to involve regulators at an early stage? What fears are there? And then Franz, if you could complement this and also make a link to how the qualification procedure might be and other facilities used as a discussion platform. Over to you, Richard, please.
Thanks, Ralph. I guess there are two things there that came to mind. Whenever there's a funding call to address a particular challenge scientifically, I don't think regulators are particularly shy about getting in touch and will engage without any problem under those circumstances. Where I think academics have not done well in terms of interacting with the regulatory agencies is when they have innovative ideas that they want to, they think have potential to become pharmaceutical products of some sort or another. They've been very naive about the regulatory process that's involved and understanding, your demands that what a product must have in order to be approved are a lot more stringent than many academics, I think, anticipate, which is not good. And so I think this idea of part of the regulatory science research needs of improving communication, having exchanges between academics and regulators so that people can better understand the way that each side operates is really important. And that will break down the barriers that people may have in terms of engaging with the regulator as soon as they should. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. And I think we'll come back to the question of training perhaps in a moment. But Franz, do you also want to comment on what you have seen is conducive to scientific discussions with regulators?
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, I would rephrase the question and ask if there's a reluctance from regulators to be involved at an early stage when you have to write the grant proposal, because there might be the fear of also getting proposals rejected. So I think it would be good to involve regulatory agencies at a very early stage when you can still shape the research program. But I think then also the culture at regulators have to change. And I think also regulatory bodies have to accept, and then dedicated researchers have to be able to spend working on the research topic if they get involved in a research project. So I think there might be some reluctance on both sides.
Right. Thank you very much for sharing this. And that, of course, gives us also important motivation to overcome the reluctance and create these interfaces that are helpful to shape the research and then to conduct it and leverage the results. And Li-Fang and Tony, you mentioned already our build-up of the academic liaison function, and we have other entry points, early entry points that we, of course, offer for discussion and support. Perhaps, Larry, can I briefly check with you if you wanted to talk about projects to assist academia learning more about regulators and training projects, perhaps in the EU context? I was thinking of the STARS project, and possibly Sheila also wants to complement.
Thanks, Ralph. Yes, I think there's a more and more of a focus actually in facilitating early engagement between anybody developing an innovative product and regulators, and I think that's mutually beneficial. I suppose, for the people developing the medicine, it can obviously inform their development plans and help them to identify, standards that will apply and key considerations as they move forward through development. But also from the regulator's perspective, if it's disruptive and it's truly innovative, there may be a need to consider, have we got the most appropriate regulatory tools and approaches in place, and to work on that prior to until the time when the actual time comes for a regulatory submission. And Ralph mentioned STARS, and that's a specific Horizon 2020 funded initiative. We're actually into the last 6 months of the project now, and that is the regulatory authorities coming together as a consortium with a view to, I suppose, highlighting the supports that are available in terms of, particularly aimed at academics and small companies who may not have, a huge level of in-house regulatory expertise. So highlighting the supports that are available to them and encouraging that early interaction, and I suppose identifying mechanisms to support the researchers in terms of translating their research into a product in clinical use. Also encouraging funders to, I suppose, incorporate regulatory aspects as part of funding calls so that they're clearly flagged to the researchers with a view to increasing the impact of funding. So there's a number of initiatives available on the STARS website and information about the project, and indeed some educational materials as well. And I would encourage participants who are involved in the development of an innovative medicine to look at it and maybe see if there's some material there that might assist you as well, and look at the various supports that are available to encourage the interaction with regulators.
Thank you very much, Larry. And I think we are going to finish with one question that gives us back an example of how we hope that in the near future then the regulatory science research needs list will be addressed and work out as a system. And I think the question will go to Phil and Ivana. And here there's a colleague writing, there are matters to be further researched for bioequivalence, Larry, an example that you also quoted. Further research is needed. And Phil, if you could address how concretely we're hoping this will pan out over the next month, and Ivana then also come in with your comments on how academia gets involved. Over to you, Phil, if you could address the operational model as a closing element for us to look forward to delivering on the Rsrn.
Thank you very much, Ralph, and thank you very much for this question and the research that you've been doing on bioequivalence. So in this case, we'd really like to hear about this research and the topics for future research that you've identified regarding bioequivalence. So we kindly ask you to email those into us, and then we'll share them with the relevant colleagues at EMA and even across the EU regulatory network as appropriate, to work out whether we should update the regulatory science research needs list with these questions, and also how best to get back to you. I don't know, Ivana, if you have anything to comment to that.
Yes, what I would like to mention is that a large fraction of academia is also composed of clinical learned societies with whom we have established very close links. And I would perhaps invite everyone to have a look at the long list of organizations that are already working with EMA. It's also important to highlight the patient organizations that are also part of this long list of organizations that are working with us as potential partners for collaboration in research. So as I said in the beginning, it's important that you make yourself known to us so that we can continue the information loop and open the windows of discussion with you. So I hope that's clear from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all panel members we have on the side trying to provide and prepare the answers to the very, very interesting questions for which we all thank you online, and more answers will be there in writing. And with that, I would like to close this second question and answer session, thanking you all very much and for the interesting dialogue and exchange. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone has that. And with that, back over to you, Tony, please.
Yep. Okay. Many thanks, Ralph and colleagues. It just is. I've sort of been tasked now with the sort of wrap up and conclusion, and it's always incredibly difficult. But first of all, many thanks to all of those for actually attending this event. As I say, we were really very happy with the reaction, with over 400 people registering and being online in one form or another. So that's a great start, and it is a launch event. So by no means this is a first step, not the last step. And we have described it as a living research needs list, and indeed one of the Q&A from the colleagues was proposing an alternative, which would be a learning regulatory research needs list, and I think that sort of sentiment of a learning regulatory system is very valid, and we'd be very happy to pick up that sort of spirit. I have to also express thanks to the sort of academic liaison colleagues themselves. So you've heard from Ralph, Li Fang, and Phil actively on the presentation today, but there are some, as always, backroom support, and we have to the left of me just here in the room is a combination of Lucia and Romana, who are putting this together along with other colleagues who have helped in the background. But a particular thanks goes to the panelists that helped support the Q&A session. We had a couple of power panelists in the form of Francois and Larry, who gave the perspective both from the patient advocate perspective and also then from the in leadership on the innovation network in Europe. And hopefully we convinced you that regulatory science really is at the base of everything we're about with regards to our standards and guidelines development, and then tracking down ultimately into the assessment. Having said that, it's a very long journey sometimes from those discussions, and can be over many years. I think that was illustrated very well with by Franz with his some real world experience of a number of projects over the decades, and sort of hints and tips on how you can engage with the regulator and how you can progress and access the various fundings to address some of these regulatory needs that we've expressed. In particular, I would also like to express thanks then to Professor Richard Guy. You may not realize, but he's actually based live at the moment from California, so God only knows what time that is, but he seemed very alert and on the ball, as one would expect, and was able to share with us his perspective on the rationale for the collaboration, the free exchange between academic and regulators, and the fact that the response will be there provided the correct funding instruments are identified. And with that then, a final vote of thanks then to Carmen La Plaza Santos then, who very much gives us the perspective of the Horizon Europe, the co-creation ambition that has the engagement both with the regulators and the academics, the fact that the innovative health tech really does require a parallel advancement in the regulatory science, and I think we can all subscribe to that. And she gives us a heads up, a watch out for the latest installment of the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda coming out under the EHE umbrella, but also a very strong encouragement to explore what lies under the health cluster. And there was a number of destinations, Destination 6 being one of the more obvious ones, but also an encouragement to look into those other destinations that can have applicable regulatory science sort of projects associated with them that I think will address some or all of the needs that we have identified today. I really am conscious that in a 2-hour slot, you know, it's incredibly hard to do justice to this topic, and I think we have, and the colleagues have been at pains for this. Really is a reach out to you as key stakeholders on this topic. Heavily, you know, influenced on academia has been the sort of target audience for today primarily, but without doubt the industry colleagues are there with regards to some of these competitive collaborative research that Carmen was identifying, and we hope that we continue this dialogue through the various sort of routes that we're opening up through the course of this year and into next. And we will organize, I think, downstream events, maybe targeting more specific elements of focus as the years progress. So with that, I just want to finish with thank you very much for your engagement, the exercise thus far, and really it is a collaborative work that we look forward is going to add value to this discussion and this environment, building a really healthy ecosystem for healthcare in Europe. And with that, thank you very much, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Bye-bye for now.